how confident are you that you have the right legal things in place to be on the right side of both employment law and data protection when it comes to working with virtual assistants and remote workers? If you're like me and most people out there who aren't 100% confident they've got it absolutely nailed, then listen to this episode, because today I'm joined by the founder of KoffeeKlatch. Annabel is an amazing resource, someone who distills the complexities of legal jargon and employment law into really understandable, practical and implementable advice, and also provides brilliant training and documentation to go along with it. So if you want to sleep well tonight, knowing that you've got everything in place you need to stay on the right side of the employment and also data protection and all that stuff besides, then check out this episode because I think you'll enjoy it. I definitely did when I recorded it. So the question is this: how do entrepreneurs like us who don't have an endless supply of cash, how do we leverage the best apps, virtual assistants, automation tools and systems to scale our businesses, increase our profits and have more time to do what we love to do each day? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answer. My name's Dr. Steve Day and this is Systemize Your Success. Hello and welcome to Systemize Your Success. As always, I'm Dr. Steve Day, and today I'm joined by Annabel Kaye, who's the founder of KoffeeKlatch. And KoffeeKlatch is an awesome organization that helps small businesses by providing them with legal contracts and GDPR support, especially focusing on working with virtual assistants, freelancers, remote workers. And so somebody that I've worked with, as in used their services in my own business, and I've been really impressed. I wanted to get Annabel on today to share some of the insights and really to hopefully share some of the stuff I've learned from working with Annabel, but for you guys as the audience. So welcome, Annabel. Really excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to talking to you.
Good. Well, I'd like to kick off with just a little bit of a brief history of how you got to do what you do. Where's your passion come from? Why is it that you decided to spend your energy, time, and focus on doing what you do with helping small businesses with their legal problems?
I think I've always done it. I mean, I'll go right back to the back end of the 70s here, where I started in HR and employment law, running a telephone advisory service in the days when, by the way, if you wanted to draft a letter for a client that was the other end of the country, you typed it, put it in the post, and they telephoned you with their amendments, which you marked up on a piece of paper and then retyped the letter. The technology for working with people who are not in the same physical location as you has changed beyond measure in that time scale, but we're still trying to work with people the other end of the country, the other end of the world. And my passion for doing it came from realizing, frankly, that a lot of legal complications that small businesses suffer from and complain about are not directly created by the law. They're created by people who make a lot of money out of complicating things. So they would write a contract for a small business that no one but the person who wrote the contract could apply. Or they would set up a disciplinary system that needed 15 phone calls in order to get to the end of. Whereas I always thought the whole point of running a business for yourself was that you should be within reason self-sufficient. And you should only be calling in experts for things that legitimately are technically complicated. And I guess in that sense, I've always been a bit of a rebel, whereas everyone else in the professions tends to want to complicate things. I've always been wondering about going, well, couldn't we put that in one sentence? Or why do we have to have 15 stages? What's wrong with two? It's just my nature, really. I think I'm impatient.
But maybe that's what it is, and maybe because I feel I've approached my business in a quite a similar way. Like having worked with you, as in we've worked as in we've paid for your services for our contracts. That's what I'm trying to say. And I think one of the things that really struck me as different about your approach, which I really resonated with, is the fact that you, as you say, you distill things into plain English. So you've got these nice little videos that explain what the hell's going on with these contracts, which is just a absolute godsend, because someone like me who hasn't got a legal background, I know it's important, but I just need someone to explain, like, what the hell does this term mean in this, contract term? I know it's got to be there, but why? And what am I signing? And so that was super nice. And the other thing I loved about the way you've approached um, your work is that you provide people with templates that they can actually use and edit and actually without having to have, like you just said, this ongoing expensive legal relationship with somebody for what is actually just a fundamental part of business. And the reason I really resonate with this because that's my approach to systems is that my philosophy is that you shouldn't need to have a business process consultant under your on your payroll forevermore. You shouldn't need systems experts or automation experts. Like if we can explain how this stuff works in plain English to anybody and give people the tools and know how to do it, that's like the job done. Like let people get on with it, and then when they need that next level of support, they can come back and ask for it. And so I
Absolutely.
think, like from what I've seen of what you do, that seems to be your approach too, which I think is really refreshing in the legal world.
It's what we're trying to do. It does have a downside for some people because we work on the basis that you want to understand what you're doing. And we do have a subset of clients going, I don't want to watch a video. I don't want to understand what the document says. I just want to download it and bang it off, send it to someone, which is their privilege. When you run your own business, you're entitled to determine what approach you're taking to things. But it's a bit worrying when contracts are really the promises you're making and the promises you are prepared for the law to make you keep. If you haven't read them, because you might not actually have wanted to make that promise if you'd understood what it meant.
Yeah, and I totally hear you, but I do feel like as a small business owner, it's sometimes challenging, like to understand, and it's that like you said, it's it's not understanding what it is that you're actually getting into simply because of the jargon that's used, and it can be really off-putting and just like my brain just sort of fogs over when I get into the legal stuff because it is just a lot of the legal spiel is just nonsense. It's a bit like when I used to be a doctor and you had two doctors talking to each other. Like if you didn't have years of experience, trained to be a medical professional, you'd have no idea what they were talking about. And then one of the skills you had to develop as a doctor is talking to patients about the same thing you just had a conversation with in the next room, which was total nonsense, and then turn that into something that's a human will understand. And I think that, yeah,
Absolutely. And I think doctors could do that with writing. Well, we've had quite a medical year, fortunately, not with me. And it's resulted in a letter from a consultant. And my husband, who used to work in medical research, and I've read it 4 times, and we know what each word in it means. We can Google the parts of the body, the names of the medication, the prognosis for the conditions, but we actually don't understand whether that means that we are having another consultation or not, or whether one is necessary or not. And it's a 3-page letter.
yeah.
And at no point does anyone actually say, and as a result of this, this is going to happen or this is not going to happen. And I do sympathise. Some of my best friends are medics, by the way, but I did send this one to a friend who is a medic who said, I've no idea either. It's not you.
There you go. It's not you. It's not you. It's me. It's that
And I
scenario.
think all professions do that.
Yeah.
I've been completely bewildered by IT. I mean,
Yeah.
my current IT guy is the genius of speaking to me in English. He's been doing my stuff for about 15 years, so it's kind of learned. But people, they do it with websites, don't they? Do you want this or that? Well, I don't know. What difference does it make if I choose A over B? What is in it that I should care about?
Yeah.
And they go, well, you just got to choose because we can't implement this without a decision.
But that's exactly, and that's why I really appreciated the way that you've presented the legal side of stuff, because it actually means that if I want to get into it, if I want to understand it, I can. And actually, by the end of it, then I actually understand what I'm signing or what it's all about. So, with that in mind, what I'd like to do is in plain English, if you wouldn't mind, Annabelle, in plain English, let's actually talk about some of the really important things that we should be thinking about as small business owners, because I learned quite a lot by going through your videos, stuff about working with virtual assistants, which I was kind of aware of because of my work as a doctor, because I worked as a locum doctor. So you'll have to remind me of the terms, but there's a clause which means that you end up working as an employee even if you intended to work as a contractor. So you end up with all the employment law stuff going on. Remind me what that law is?
IR35 is
I
what it's
That's
commonly
the one,
known.
IR35. So this is having some clever clauses in your contracts, for example, can really help you avoid that. And so those are kind of tips which like I think they're amazing takeaways. Can you share some that just explain that a little bit more detail in, so people actually understand what I'm talking about, and maybe some of the key things that you see people get wrong when they don't actually have a proper approach to working with remote workers in a contractual basis.
The biggest thing, I think, is assuming, and I'm assuming you've taken on a freelancer, because obviously there are remote workers who are employees, but that's a whole other category of contracts and obligations. But taking on a freelancer and even giving them a contract that says you are a freelancer doesn't really affect their legal status if, to all intents and purposes, you're treating them as if they were an employee. In fact, this is why KoffeeKlatch has a duck logo, because I was trying to explain this years ago to my husband, who said, well, how can you be contracted as a self-employed person and be an employee? And I was moving stuff around, to go, well, look, this is how it works. And I had 3 rubber ducks, and it's all about the duck test. And it's still all about the duck test. So the fundamental test here is, if it looks like employment, you treat someone like an employee. If you pay them like an employee, then they're an employee, which is a paraphrase of the old thing. If it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, chances are it's a duck. So contracts are brilliant, but contracts don't overwrite reality. Otherwise, I'd sign a contract saying I'm 19 and a multimillionaire and drop dead gorgeous, and that would be the end of it. So they're not magic contracts. But if your contract has got the right provision in it and you operate in that way, then contracts can stop you having the employment status put in there, which costs you a lot in tax and risk and all sorts of things. But it's not a magic cure. You can't dangle a self-employment contract in front of the tax man and go, that's the end of it. And there are some keys in this which are really important for when you're outsourcing. If you need to be able to tell the person you're working with, right now, drop everything, do this in this way, then you need an employee, because you are controlling them, right? And this is where locoming gets a bit complicated, because you're like a temporary employee, but not ish. And I used to do a lot of work with pharmaceutical locum contracts.
Let's not get into the medical
So
side.
we
It's
don't want to
too
go there. Do you know what
complicated
I mean?
there.
But it is much more complicated than I'm making it sound. But if, on the other hand, you're working with a VA who's running their own business, he or she, and often it is she, will have set aside 5 hours a week for you, 10 hours a week for you. And what you are effectively saying is, when we get to my next slot, this is what I'd like you to do. So that's a big difference. So if you can't wait your turn, if you actually need to tell your person, you turn up here at 9:05 and you use this and you do that and you do it in that way, you really need an employee. And no amount of self-employment contracting will change that, if that's what you're really up to.
And how does that work in practice with, say, working with someone in the Philippines?
Well, it's interesting, because the whole thing about tax and employment, mostly but not completely, stops at the edge of the UK. So you may have someone that you're micromanaging in the Philippines, but that wouldn't make them your employee in the UK, because employment and tax in the UK is about people working in the UK. And what is really weird about the world we live in, which is completely global, you and I could be on different continents in different time zones, is all law is national. So we've got this kind of nutcase world where we work everywhere, but law is not everywhere, it's somewhere specific. There is a caveat to that. If you are running a team and you are functioning as an agency, you can be responsible for what would have happened if that person was in the UK. But for an ordinary business outsourcing to VAs in the Philippines, that's not a problem. Whether your VAs in the Philippines are employees is governed by Philippine law, and they have a massive outsourced industry, as you know. It's a very big part of the Philippines economy, and they don't normally come down on individual businesses having effectively full-time VAs in the Philippines. They're much more likely to look at agencies who've got 100 VAs in the Philippines and make sure they're remitting their tax ben. So, but generally speaking, they're very happy with the notion of self-employment, and the people in the Philippines are normally properly registered, particularly if you're sourcing them from a reputable house.
Yeah,
No.
that's very, very reassuring to know. And I think one of the things that or a couple of things that I learned though going through the training that you provided, which I did actually make amendments to my contracts as a result of, because I thought, yeah, fair enough. At this moment in time, like you say, it's very much segmented, the law side of things. But I also want to not feel in my own that I'm doing something that could be seen at some point to be, of trying to avoid tax or avoid employment responsibilities or whatever. And so, a couple of the key things that I thought, and maybe they're not, maybe it's an overkill for my situation because my contractors I'm only hiring a couple of people in the Philippines, and it's only working for me. I don't hire them out as an agency, so it is very much like you just described, quite a simple relationship. But there was a couple of things that I thought were interesting. Were one is to have a clause, and I remember this from the RI35 as being a doctor, is you have to have a clause that says the person is allowed to work elsewhere. If you do the opposite, you're then, like you say, you're restricting that person to only work for you, then actually, obviously, then they're an employee. Whereas if you're saying openly, no, you can work for anyone else, and also you can, as the virtual assistant, you're within your rights to get someone else to do that work for you on your behalf, as long as they're up to standard. And I think that was quite an interesting one because a lot of people complain or talk about, oh, I think my virtual assistant is, getting someone else to do their work for them. And actually that's part of the role that you're hiring somebody as a non-employee virtual assistant is their right to be able to do that. So I thought that was a really interesting insight.
Yeah, again, it comes back to this control thing. If you want to be able to say, so and so works for me, like, if you've got a job and you send in your mate to do your job for you, you very soon find out you haven't got a job, wouldn't you? But as a business owner, if you've got, I mean, I'm getting some plumbing done on my house this morning, and the guy that runs the plumbing firm didn't turn up, some other guy did. I'm not going to say to him, where's Craig? Go away. Only Craig can do this job. If the guy's a suitably qualified guy, he's doing the job. That's running a business. I think there are issues about data privacy that will come on to about that, because obviously you can't have your stuff disappearing down the rabbit hole if you've no idea who's touching your stuff. But fundamentally, that's what self-employment is. You get to say where, you get to say when, and you get to say who. And a lot of people have emotional difficulty with this. Whereas I encourage people to set up substitution properly and securely and appropriately, not ban it. As to what other people do in terms of other roles, to me, it slightly goes without saying that if you're self-employed, you're going to have more than one client. In fact, it's a jolly good idea that people do also be, but it's not of itself a test, is it? You could have two part-time jobs and be employees in both. Of itself, it doesn't make you self-employed. You could be a Saturday girl at Boots and work Wednesday in the chippy, and that wouldn't make you a self-employed business owner. It's a start, but I see a lot of emphasis on how many clients you've got when you could actually have three employed roles, don't you? Bless them, if you're American, you could have five, poor things.
Yeah, totally. But I think that going back to not to put the fear of God into it to everyone who's got a virtual assistant full time is actually, from what I'm hearing from what you're saying, that these things these things are useful to think about for lots of reasons, including legal reasons. But in practically speaking, if we have a relationship with one assistant who happens to work for us the majority or all of their time, it's I'm hearing it's not likely we're going to get a knock on the door from the Filipino HMRC equivalent.
Yeah,
Uh,
they can't because
yeah.
their jurisdiction doesn't enforce in the UK.
One of the things that we do, even before we started talking, was to actually have a part of our training as in the mandatory training that every contractor does when they come and work with us, is that there's actually a training video with some direction to the Philippine. This is for our Filipino staff, not staff, sorry, Filipino contractors, is to actually direct them to what you need to do as a self-employed person in the Philippines with regards to registration and tax. Just so actually that from my side, I can sort of like sleep a little better knowing I've done as much as I can to get them to do what they should be doing as well. Do you feel that's a useful or a sensible approach or
Absolutely. I mean, I am passionately for self-employment and I'm passionately for the freelance economy, but you and I both know that the outer edges of freelance is what is charmingly known as the black economy. And I'm also passionately for paying people a sensible wage for what they do in the country they live in, them paying tax, us paying tax, and somebody fixing the roads. I don't think it's a good idea for everyone to pay 5p an hour and end up with enslaved children in sweatshops the other side of the world. In fact, one of my initial concerns, and we have two Philippines VAs, by the way, one of whom was provided by a mutual friend who's been with us for years, was that I didn't want to take part in this kind of slave economy in any way, shape, or form. I think, although some people love the idea of exploiting people, and I want people to make a reasonable amount of money on doing the things they do.
absolutely? One of the things I've talked about a number of times on the podcast is about, and I've written blogs on this as well, because I was worried about this when I first started, especially when I started talking to my family and saying, "Oh, I've got someone I'm working in the Philippines," and some of the commentary that came across was about sweatshops and all that sort of thing, and so I was like really conscious of this, especially because I've got nephews that are from Philippines. My step sister-in-law, I think that's right. She's from the Philippines as well. So I also wanted to be just like ensure that I was doing the moral thing, if that's the right expression, but just doing the right thing really. And so I just spent quite a lot of time looking at, okay, well, what is a fair wage and how do you determine it? And whether it's whatever the country you're working in, whether it is $2 or $50, it's completely relative to where they're working. And a lot of people struggle with this concept of, yeah, but how can it possibly be okay to pay someone $3 an hour? Whereas, okay, well, put it this perspective. If I lived in Switzerland, if I was a Swiss national and I went to work in Bulgaria, both the national wages of those are within the European Union. Or sorry, Switzerland's not in the European Union, within Europe
EFTA,
as a
yeah.
body, sorry. And yet the difference is tenfold. So roughly, I mean, this is not meant to be an accurate assessment, but roughly,
Mm.
the average wage in the Switzerland is 10 times what it is in Bulgaria. But so if you had someone in Switzerland, they could not live on a wage you're paying them in Bulgaria. And if you vice versa, someone would live like a king if you paid them in Bulgaria what you earn in Switzerland. So it's got to be relative. So anyway, yeah, just wanted to get that point because you brought it up. But so it's something that I've been very conscious
I
of
think it's
and trying to
important.
learn.
I look at the average wages
Yeah,
where I'm hiring, and but also bear in mind a self-employed VA is not shouldn't be on a wage. They are absorbing costs that employees don't. So if you look at UK wages, you wouldn't expect a self-employed VA to be charging the average wage for administration in the UK because they're funding their own insurance, equipment, marketing, all the rest of it. You certainly shouldn't be paying less than that, but I try within reason to pay what makes sense. And by the way, I do have quite a lot of VAs in the UK, and I have tech people in South Africa. I'm used to traveling the world without leaving my office.
yeah, I think it's great. You get to just meet wonderful people from all over the world. I've got now clients in every corner of the world for the same reason. And so I love the whole remote working philosophy. But I live in Sweden, so I live in Stockholm in Sweden, and most of my clients are in the UK. And I've met very few of my clients personally when I'm like actually in person. Yeah, I see them all the time. But anyway, we digress. I did want to pick up on something you mentioned that I know would like to talk about is GDPR or data protection, and primarily in data protection as in terms of like, yeah, there's the legal side of stuff which you can talk about, but for me as a business owner, um, is like my concerns, my worries about data and about my own data. You can talk about the legal side with other people's data, but I'm thinking like how, like you mentioned about, say, if you have a contractor and there is that option for them to you utilize someone else in their organization. So we're talking about a self-employed person, so a virtual assistant who is registered as being self-employed, that classes them as a business. Therefore, they could give someone else in their own self-employed business the work that you've given to them. They could give it to someone else to do. That's what I'm talking about, that sort of scenario. But there are issues with that.
Yeah.
And what can you just like explain what your worries about that and what sort of steps can you actually put in place to make that not such a worry?
Think it helps to think of personal information because obviously if you want someone to design a logo and they get someone else to do it, as long as you own the rights in the logo, which is a whole other issue, by the way, but as long as the rights are passed to you, you don't really care who designed it, do you? It's like your VA is acting as a project lead in that capacity. You don't insist that they do your bookkeeping, design your logo, pick up your kids. You know what I mean? They don't do everything. They're often a project lead. When it comes to sharing data, I think it really helps to look at it as if it's money. And because data is money, by the way, on the black economy, a good set of personal details with an address and maybe half of the bank details can go for £1,000. Think about this. So before you give someone access to your client base, which might have, I don't know, there might be 3,000 names on my mailing list at the moment. I don't know, I don't count them many. That's a lot of money to someone who steals it. Think of it as cash. How would you treat it? Well, if you left £3,000 or €3,000 on the table in your physical office, would you walk out and just leave it there and hope that your staff are all honest and reliable and responsible and no one will climb through the window? We do this with data all the time because we don't figure out how valuable it is. So if you start to think of it as money, the whole GDPR thing makes more sense. So the first thing is, if you have £3,000 in cash and you gave someone access to it, for example, a bookkeeper or an accountant, you might want to put it in a safe and give them the safe code. You might not want to just throw it out the window and say, pick it up, it's here, because someone else might come in and get it. That's the very basic level of data sharing security. Really, that you need a way of making sure that only the people who've got access to it have got access to it. Don't chuck your money out the window and hope for the best. When it
Just,
comes to,
just before you go on about, I just want to keep, please remember what you're going to say, because I just want to pick up something that I think I've spoken to a number of people about GDPR in the past, and often the scaremongery for why do you need to be bothered about it comes from the risk of fines. And one of the arguments against that is, as a small business owner, like the size that most of like myself and most of my clients are, the chance of the GDPR
yeah,
police coming to get me
I
is
don't go down that route.
is
It's a
no.
bit like driving over the speed limit. You know, we all know we shouldn't. Some of us get a speeding ticket, but most of us don't,
But
right?
I think your point there, which is more the point of yes, but if I'm speeding and I hit somebody, it's a
Then you're in
personal
trouble.
responsibility. It's
Yes.
actually what does this mean to me personally in regards to like the analogy you gave with the I've got 3 grand and I stick it on my table. I can relate to that. I like that. So I just wanted to pick up that. I think it's really well, as you said, you like putting in things to play in English that people can understand. I like that one. Anyway, I
I don't like
interrupt.
fear marketing, but if I trust you with my data, I've effectively said, I think you're trustworthy for 3 grand or 1 grand or whatever.
Yeah.
If that data gets stolen, now it is true I may never track it back to you, but it is true also that some of us use disposable emails when we sign up for people's special offer, and we know that only one person should ever be emailing on that email. So if two people email me on that account, I know you lost it, or you gave it away, or it was stolen from you, right? Now, you might go, why does that matter? But I might have been about to sign you up to do a much bigger project than the one we did before. And now I'm thinking, dream on, sunshine, you're not trustworthy. Now we're seeing that. I can't speak for Sweden, because I don't speak Swedish and I'm not on the ground with the GDPR regime, but it's broadly similar to us. When GDPR first came in, as we know it today, because it's actually been in for decades under different labels, right? Everybody was like, you'll get fined, you'll get fined, you'll get fined, you're right. And a lot of people went, well, I don't know anyone who's been fined. But I tell you what is happening as it works its way through the system. You've possibly noticed the headlines when the very biggest fish get fined, a £1 billion, right? So they go, well, we don't want to spend all this money again. We're going to do an audit. And one of the audits they do is of their suppliers, their first tier suppliers, who are also very big. And they say to those suppliers, what are the contracts and security protocols you've got with the people you hire? So they go down the chain. And we are now seeing this year for the first time, VAs coming to us saying, I've had this questionnaire from my client saying, if we want to renew the contract next year, I need to provide the following documents. What the hell are they? And those documents are data privacy policies, your normal security rules, how you contract with your associates to make sure everything's secure. So it's slowly working its way down the system. Now, obviously, if your marketplace is working for micro businesses who serve the public directly, they're not in this chain of coming down. But I can tell you now, you'd be hard put as a VA to contract with a law firm or a health firm without having a functional grip of GDPR. You might be able to contract with a coach who sells magnets that make you healthy, but that's a different marketplace, isn't it? And it's dividing the marketplace into the people who know what they're doing and the people who've got no clue. And you need to decide what marketplace are you in, because if you want to be in that chain of responsible, whatever, you can't carry on with a no clue business model.
No. And I think that, again, without becoming like overwhelmed, like becoming the, oh, this is a huge task. Like some of the stuff you can do is relatively simple. Like you've mentioned a few different like contracts, if you like, or agreements, like a data protection agreement. So like just having some written agreement, well, how will you handle my data? Because it can get really complicated because you have data controllers and data, oh, I can't remember the terms all now. I've been through it, but it gets a bit confusing and a bit overwhelming. And then, but actually just having something in place to say, I mean, some of the top tips I've picked up along the way is like literally just like if you're going to hire somebody, you ask them, when was the last time, and get them to prove it. When was the last time you updated your operating system in your computer? When was the last time, have you got virus and software and, installed on your computer? What are you, do you save anything local? Like this simple, like practical things, even before we then go, okay, well, actually, let's put something formal in writing. But actually, just thinking about this stuff and thinking, like, one thing that we do is anything that's, you mentioned this before about so giving someone the password to the safe where the money is. So, one thing that is super common in small businesses, and it's something that we promote we not promote, we suggest is a way to share access to apps is by you can share a password. Like we use something like LastPass to share it securely because some apps don't have the functionality or it's just unaffordable to get a team app. But the risk is if you do that with something like a CRM, you've got no idea who's logging in and out.
Yeah, you've got no trackability. And of
You've
course,
got to be
in terms
careful.
of
Yeah, you've got to be careful with where you do share things and where you think, no, I've got to actually here have a password, email, username password combination so I can see that person did this. I think that's again a useful just rule of thumb.
also, I think, and I'm finding this a lot now, when people share a password, they have to turn off multi-factor authentication, double factor authentication, because if 4 or 5 people might be logging in with that email and password and it authenticates to one phone, how is that going to work for the other people trying to get in? Now,
Totally.
I think it's widely accepted, and I'm not an IT person, that multi-factor authentication is the very baseline of securing data these days. So what you're doing is you're leaving your safe open so anyone can come and go, rather
Yeah.
than have 2 people needing the combination to open it. And I understand the convenience, and I understand when you're a startup, the temptation to do that. But I would say this, if you're in business and you're actually making money as opposed to just getting going and hoping to, you should be using software that allows multi-factor authentication, you should have it turned on, and you should be considering investing in those extra user logons. Now, one of the problems with that, and we have it, we're doing our end of year data audit, we do it every year. So, is the sheer number of bits and pieces you need means you've got an infinite number of subscriptions with an infinite number of monkeys subscribed to it, it seems to me. So we're always in the process of consolidating our platforms so that rather than pay £5 a month for 100 platforms each user, we're trying to go less and less platforms. And we're always looking for platforms that allow not just multi-user, but different roles so that we don't let everyone in at admin. We have some people who are view only, because the problem as a business owner is you get a VA or someone and you just give them access to everything, right? However you do it, login sharing. But as the team grows and their team grows, it's not appropriate that people in accounts see somebody's medical history. It's not appropriate that people in marketing, they may want to know the average customer spend, but they don't need to know your bank details when you paid. Do you know, the idea that all information should be shared is so insecure inherently, and you just have to invest in that, just as you investigate. If you're growing a business, at some point or another, you invest in looking at your marketplace, don't you? And going, do I have the same offer for everybody?
Totally.
Nobody would say to you, save money and just make one offer to everybody beyond a certain point of startup. It just comes with the territory. And a lot of people don't want to do that. But then when something goes wrong, the entire system collapses. And by the way, top tip, not for you, because you wouldn't dream of doing it. Do not let your VA be the master user in your website, in your domain, in your CRM, because when you and they part company, and we all love our VAs, but you're not going to employ them for 100 years. At some point or another, they're going to leave or you're going to ask them to. You need to be the person who switches them off, not the person going begging them to let you back into your own systems.
100%. I mean, we have within our training, we have a basic onboarding and then advanced onboarding systems, and this is all about being tracking user access, who has access to what via what, and having very simple but effective policies about, okay, so of the 55 apps we've got, which ones contain any information that if we lost it and never access it again, would it actually have a detrimental effect on our business or actually have a risk for GDPR? And that's a separate list from our, oh, we've got a free stock image account that we just use now and again to grab an image for, for a blog post, which it doesn't matter if we lose access to that. So we divide it and say, okay, which are the business critical apps, which or data protection issue apps, and which are everything else. And then we go, okay, so who has access to which ones? So then when a specific person leaves, we can say, well, this person has access to, these five mission critical apps. We call them the unavailable apps because of the way LastPass works. And therefore, we only need to change those five passwords, not what the hell do they have access to? I can't remember. Let's just change everything. Let's not bother because it takes too long to do.
Yeah,
And
and
it's like,
also now nobody else can get in, and I've just got to spend 2 weeks trying to get people re-authenticated. I'm not funny.
totally, yeah.
I would add something going forward into your list, though, that you may want to look at in 2025. Top tip:
Yeah.
have a look at, even in your non-GDPR sensitive apps, what's going on with artificial intelligence, because some AIs are not what they seem. And even though you might think, oh, they're just generating images for me, if they're running around the back of your systems, they can be collecting data. It's not normally a problem for what I would call the big name houses, but for people picking up stuff on their phone and going, oh, that looks like a good app that will write me sales scripts and this, that, and the other. You need to be careful. AI is not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing. But AI used irresponsibly, like medicine, aspirins are great, but take too many, it's the problem. It's it's not a good thing or a bad thing. Use AI responsibly and build it into your checklist system. Think of AI as a user that you're not quite sure what the hell they're up to. And make sure that within reason you do know what they're up to.
I think that's a brilliant, brilliant point. And it's really, like when you look at some bigger organizations, so my wife works for one of the big five accounting firms, and so they were banned from using AI at work
Mm.
until the company had built a sandbox or ring fence or whatever it's called internal large language model AI data system that could then be fed the data, because obviously all of their data is company sensitive information because it's their accounts.
That's right. Don't
And
have any
so
other time.
the idea of uploading a spreadsheet to ChatGPT, which is actually probably one of the, like, arguably one of the better ones, then that would be a big no-no and a sackable offence. However, now they've got it protected, they can use it. And it's the same way as, like, if you go to with AI and say, "Oh, here's access to my Google Drive." And what you don't realize is within a few seconds, it's read every single piece of information in your entire Google Drive, rather than saying, "No, here is the document I want you to look at." And it's just that being
Yeah.
mindful of that. And
And
it's
it's the same with
yeah,
users. And that goes straight to data privacy because here's the issue. You've got a VA in the Philippines or anyone else in the world, doesn't matter where they are, and they've got data on their laptop. Now, there are two big issues about data security when you're outsourcing. Who else has got access to that laptop? Never mind how responsible your VA is, but if their kids get on and they've got a teenage boy and he likes a little bit of raw and raunchy that mum doesn't know about, stuff can be entering that laptop that the owner of the laptop doesn't know anything about. So laptop sharing is a real issue for data security, and you know you can fix it by not telling them other people who use it shouldn't be at admin level, blah blah blah. If it's really sensitive data like financial and health, you may have to ship out your own machine for them to use and not use their machine. But multi-user can have people putting bots on their laptop that even the owner of the laptop doesn't know about. And
totally.
all hell will kick off when the wrong one gets in the wrong one because it will come back up through your data into your systems, which is why in the data sharing agreements that we offer you as templates within your packs, you specify what platforms they can use to access your data. And increasingly, we're saying to people, you need to tell us if you're using AI, either on our stuff, you need our consent, but also if you're using it on your machines because they go walkabouts.
Yeah.
And I don't think the typical ordinary freelancer outside of the cybersecurity realm has any idea how to tell it to look at one file as opposed to the whole drive, you know? They're
No.
not tech savvy in that way.
Just while we're on the point, if you do want to find out more, I'm going to give this at the end as well when we do finish. But as we just talked about now, if you want to find out more about Annabel, what she does, her work at KoffeeKlatch, if you go to sys.academy/tools, so sys dot academy/tools, you'll find a link on that page to reach out to Annabel and find out how she can help you in your business as well.
Thank you.
Cool.
But I don't want to scare people. You know, I think AI is a
Yeah.
very useful tool, but
I think
I think you just don't
sorry,
want to go mad with it.
one of the things that we do, because I'm not as conscious as you are about this stuff, but I am aware of it. And so one of the things that we do is we actually got a an app through AppSumo, which was called Team GPT, and you can go. I think it's probably still available on AppSumo. And if you go to that site I mentioned before, sys.academy/tools, you'll find a link to our affiliate for AppSumo. If you feel like supporting this channel, you can use that. If not, just use your own. On AppSumo there, we found this app called Team GPT, and what that allows you to do is link it back to your own OpenAI. I'm not going to get too technical, but you can link it back to your own OpenAI account, and then your users can all log in with their own username and password credentials, and then they all access your AI, and therefore anything they upload is only in your AI systems. So therefore, when they leave, therefore they lose access to everything. Because if they use their own AI, whether
You
it's
lose it.
ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, everything you get them to work on the entire time they work with you is memorized by that AI. So when they leave, you can do all the shutting down you want, but they've got a copy of every single thing you've ever shared with them within the
And you
AI
don't,
memory.
which means that you've now got a new blank AI that doesn't know how you like things written and how you like things done. So
Exactly, yeah.
it is a bit like I say, I think AI is a very useful tool, but just to let everybody use AI for anything randomly is a bit mad. And I think I always think we have shiny things syndrome, don't we? Somebody said AI will save you time and money, so we all use it. And then you discover that it's not always quite as straightforward as that.
It's taken us about 9 months to get to perfect our prompts for writing a couple of emails, you know. And I think the amount of time we spent writing the actual prompts and getting them spot on, probably could have just written all the emails. Going forward, it's going to be a big time saver, but it's been a learning curve. And like with everything, it's never as easy as people make out on
But there's a
YouTube.
whole new industry now, people
Yeah,
selling prompts, isn't there? So
totally.
the thing I don't, I mean, AI never has the foggiest notion what I'm talking about. I've got quite a strong South London accent and I talk about technical subjects. So the attempts it has to write stuff for me or even transcribe me are mostly useful for comedy.
Good. Okay. I'm going to say I think we need to draw this to a close because I've just looked note of the time and we could literally I could talk for hours on this all this stuff. I find it incredibly fascinating and you're a very, very easy person to speak to about this stuff, which is often not an easy subject to talk about. But before I do go, is there anything else? I've got some more questions I'm going to ask you right at the end. But is there anything else that you feel that I should have asked you that I haven't at this point that you think would be really helpful to share with our listeners?
Yes, I think when you're working with people overseas, you need to look at what you want them to do and whether it's appropriate to share that data. Now, one of my big concerns, and I know people do it a lot, and I work with people who do it, is landlords and property people who send straight to the Philippines all the ID data for their tenants, right? So they are basically, bless them, emailing the most valuable personal information worth a fortune in the identity theft market to people who are keeping it on machines they don't know who else has got access to and all the rest of it gives me the heebie-jeebies. So be sensible, understand that someone's email address, their work email address, is not the same thing as their passport. This is high risk data that you should not be just emailing around the world. It should stay in the UK. It should be on your shared drives. If you need to give someone access to it, that absolutely has to be given on a non-download dual authentication basis. Not all data is created equally. And I see a lot of people going, well, I'm obliged to collect it, so I'm just chucking it out to my VA. You're obliged to collect it and share it securely and appropriately. You're not obliged to collect it and just throw it out there. And I'm quite surprised at the way identity theft valuable data is chucked around the world. And I've actually, well, I would do, wouldn't I? I've refused to do business with a number of organizations when they've go, we need your ID. I go, great, I want to see a data privacy policy. Why do I want to see the data privacy policy? I want to know what you want it for and what you're planning to do with it. Anyone who says to me I haven't got one is never getting my ID. Right. Then when they've got one, I have a look at it. And then if it doesn't say we're sharing this data overseas, I'll still go back and ask because, I'm cynical. And I go, who's seeing this data? And a lot of organizations don't understand that if someone in America or the Philippines is looking at your scanned copy of my passport on a drive they give access to, that is sending my data to the Philippines because they think I never sent it anywhere. But they don't have to send it for it to be shared in the Philippines. Their machine will download cookies. EU case law is quite plain that viewing stuff on a screen is processing it wherever. And that means if you're viewing it in another country, you're processing it wrong. And I'm quite shocked. And we see this, by the way, with children's data. I do quite a lot of work with childcare providers, after schools providers, educational coaches. And it's lovely for them to have a VA in the Philippines, but you really can't just randomly send out kids' names and addresses and ages and that they'll be at ballet at such and such a school on Friday. There's nothing wrong with Philippines VAs. They're no more or less reliable than anybody else, right? You shouldn't be doing that in the UK without a moment's thought. But somehow people get excited about the Philippines and it's like all bets are off, you know. And all bets are very much on. And if you lose that data, it gets hacked. Never mind the fines. Imagine how you'd feel if a client of yours lost everything. And I did have a friend, by the way, whose identity was stolen. I'm not saying it was due to anyone in the Philippines. It's taken him 5 years to sort out the records. He's been stopped at every border because the person who stole his ID did some pretty terrible things. He's been refused credit. He's been refused housing. How could you run the risk of subjecting one of your clients to that for the sake of setting up a little microsystem that could prevent it?
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's just common sense, but you've got to think about it. And that's,
Well,
isn't
there's
it?
an old Yorkshire saying, isn't it? There's now so rare as common sense.
No.
And
What?
I think that we don't have in our consciousness when stuff's on the computer that we're sending it around the world. In our minds, we're in our office, we haven't gone
Yeah.
anywhere. The data hasn't gone anywhere. We're not hardwired for global digital transfers. Our brain goes, I can see you right now. You're in the room with me. I think I've still got an analog brain, even though I live in a digital world.
Yeah. No, I'm the same. As in, I don't. Everyone says, "Well, how do you possibly work remotely all the time? Do you not get lonely?" It's like, no, I see people all the time.
Do you know what I like
And
best about
no, not so not to brush it. Like what you're saying, that I think is super important, and it is. When I say it's common sense, I don't mean to like be flippant about it at all. I mean, it actually, as you're just speaking, it's just like it just takes a moment's thought, and it just takes that. Okay, what can we give people open access to, or I say open with inverted commas, I mean still protected, but what can we share with other people? What actually shouldn't we? And you mentioned a couple of things, just a really practical approach to this. So one of the things that we do is use Google Shared Drives, and Microsoft have equivalent. They're slightly more complicated, but Google Shared Drives are super easy to use, and you can do things like you can add a specific person to be able to view a folder or a file, and you can limit their access so they can't copy, download, or save it. It doesn't mean they can't take a screenshot of it though, but they at least they can't actually put it anywhere else, which therefore in the future could be accessed. So you are very much limiting the scope, but it would have to be the individual you were sending it to that was corrupt for it to then get into the wrong hands. So I think that there's simple things like that that are very easy to set up. And actually managing that, I've got I actually did an episode on Google Groups, which episode 33 of this podcast, if you're interested. All use my Google Groups for sharing, and how we do it. So basically means it's not a big I was going to say it's a swear word then. It's not a big pain in the bum, let's just say, when people leave and arrive, to actually add them and remove them from hundreds of different files and folders. If you set up your sharing from either day one or whatever day you're at in your business and think about how do I make this easy? Because I think that for me, definitely back in the day, the biggest obstacle in the way of me doing the right thing was that it was just too damn hard. Too many things in my brain. I've got too much going on. I can't also think about data protection right now. And so, but when you actually start thinking about it, maybe we have to listen to this episode, you are thinking about it, then actually having some simple practical steps to help that make it easier will hopefully make your life easier.
and your contracts and your data processing forms and documentation is then easier to complete? Because one of the things we see, and we put data sharing, for the global, UK to the Philippines in the global packs, amongst others. And people come back to us and they go, I don't know what to fill in. And it's not that they don't understand the video, this is where you put X, it's that they haven't got an X. And over time, the pack's kind of grown. We had to put in sample security rules because people went, well, what is a security rule? There's an awful lot more you could do, but you have to be aware as well that normally at the point of buying the contract, they've hired the VA. They're not going to overhaul their entire business before they issue the contract. You've got to give them something to run with now, and then some pointers for the future. But an awful lot of serious entrepreneurs don't know how to set up Google Drives. I mean, I must confess, I struggle with SharePoint. Our IT people do it for me, and every now and then I email them and I go, I want to give someone access to this document, and it keeps telling me, no, I can't. And they go, because you put it in the wrong subfolder, and that's an internal only one. That's been going on for 5 years, by the way, so I don't know it's going to change anytime soon. I totally sympathize with people who can't do that, but maybe it's worthwhile, talking to you or someone who knows how to do it to get a little project going of let's get it set up right alongside the contracting. Because once you got it right, as long as you follow it, it's always right, isn't it? It's not going to suddenly need doing differently next week. But here's the pain, and all entrepreneurs, I'm one, I go, why don't we do this? And then a year later, people go, why the hell did you set it up that way? This is chaos. And I go, well, I thought I was doing it once. I didn't realise. By the way, KoffeeKlatch came from writing one outsourcing to freelancers contract 17 years ago. I definitely didn't set it up to do what it does today. All entrepreneurs are like that, aren't they? It grew because people needed it. So maybe people need a kind of tech outsourcing starter kit with their contracting outsourcing starter kit, and that solves most of the data privacy issues, apart from the final one, which is in those packs, your VA should list who they want to have access to your account data. They can also list none, but it also lists, if you decide later on you want to, this is the number of days notice we need to give consent, because obviously you'd want to set up the systems appropriately. And we really deprecate shared logging on, definitely in ID related and finance related areas, not because someone will fine you, but because it's heartbreaking. Have you ever dealt with an entrepreneur whose entire client base has been wiped by an idiot junior who didn't realise and should have never have had the rights to do that? I mean, fortunately, we're not in the data recovery business, but never mind being fined. You wouldn't be able to afford the fines
No,
anyway.
do you know which idiot employee did that in my business?
Everyone's had one of those
I'm
idiots.
pointing at him right now for those who are on the podcast. I actually deleted my entire Google shared drives by mistake when I was doing some training videos, and I instead of deleting my training account, I deleted my main Google Drive. I did recover it after 4 hours of speaking on the phone to Google support, and they were brilliant. But it
I
was
work on the basis of my day-to-day accounts don't have admin rights, which is why sometimes getting a mother when I want to restructure things. So that if I want to do something with admin rights, I have to log out and log in again, which makes you think about it, if you see what.
Yeah, they do say that. If you look at the Microsoft, sorry, Microsoft, I don't use Microsoft, use it Google, and you look at how to basically protect your data, one of the key things they say is the super user account should not be anybody's main login, even the business owner. And it's
Yeah.
that simple. So it's the simplest way to not delete. The other thing I do is that I use a backup tool. So I use, what do I use for iDrive, I think, is the one that's in favor at the moment. We use one that you can't get anymore, unfortunately, as a retail. But basically having a daily backup of everything. So we have a one for our Asana. We use Pro Backup for that. I think it's called iDrive. I'm pretty sure the one we now recommend for Google Drives and for Microsoft. At least then, if you do something stupid like me, you can recover most of it. So, or someone else does it. But anyway,
Yeah, it's
anyway,
really scary. But you can't have data security and GDPR compliance if you've got random capability for people to delete it all, because those people who can delete it all can also copy it all and extract it all, can't they?
totally,
You
totally.
do see, by the way, and I know we're closing every single day, business owners go, well, why don't I just share my admin logins with everyone and they can sort it all out?
I have clients come to me even now, and I say, how is how are you going to share that? And so, oh, I just emailed them a password when they sign up. It's like, oh, okay, let's have a look at that.
Sometimes
That's
I think
that's
I
the
should be
fun.
looking to
If
try.
everybody knew how to do all this stuff, neither of us would have a job, and we wouldn't be able to help people and make a difference. So,
That's true.
you got to look at it and there's lots of people that help me with lots of amazing stuff, which I am needing help with. So it swings and roundabouts.
Everybody needs to be really good at what they're good at and not try and do absolutely everything. I'm a firm believer in that. It's not a question of being stupid if you don't know this stuff. It just means it's not where your head lives and not what you're spending your day to day on, is it?
We can't be good
But
at
it is a
everything.
bit scary when people are basically giving their safe keys out, leaving the room and putting a notice on going, here's everything you might need, guys, come on in. And then they come back and the safe's empty, surprise, surprise.
Well, on that happy, joyful note, I'm going to draw this one to a close, but I'm going to ask you a couple of slightly more joyful questions before we end. So, this one of my favorite things is apps and technology. And so I love to ask my guests, what are your favorite browser plugins or apps or gadgets that you use to make your life better?
At the moment, I'm decluttering most of them. Actually, I'm getting rid of them because I've discovered that I acquire gadgets and apps that I never use. I've got an AppSumo account and I've had to put a kind of mental padlock on it and go, do not go in and put any more in, until we finish the data audit and we know where the gaps are. So I have very few, is the honest answer to that. Most of the apps and technology I use are about navigating because I'm quite spatially dyslexic. So I have about 4 GPSs on my phone. And I still manage to get lost with monotonous regularity. And I've just bought, what is it called? A Roku mobile what's it? Because I'm going to do some traveling in Europe in the beginning of next year in spring. And I didn't want to use unsecured Wi-Fi's, bits and pieces. And my motem Wi-Fi is so complicated. I can't get into it.
Have you,
So
have you had
that's
a
my
look?
latest one. Whether it turns out to be a godsend or another thing I can't use remains to be seen.
Have you had a look at SpaceX's global Wi-Fi?
Yes, but it's a lot of money for the amount of time I was planning to be away. If I did the true full-on digital nomad, which I'd love to, but I have a husband who refuses to travel. So unless I want to have an ex-husband, I have to keep going home. So I would love to. I did kind of look at it. Everyone recommends it highly, but I wanted something I could use for a month and then leave alone 6 months or whatever. And that seemed a bit beyond my pay grade. But
Yeah, no, I
I'll go
agree.
and have
No,
another look at it.
I've not used it. I just had a look at it. We have an amazing 4G minimum, 5G most places. Over nearly all of Sweden, and so it's very little need for me to have anything other than a non-mobile phone. But I'm just interested. Last question before you go. The title of this podcast is "Systemize Your Success." But what does success mean to you?
Freedom. I'm not really interested in owning 400 cars or 300 houses. That'd be a lot of housekeeping and admin and outsourcing the stuff. To me, success is being able to go where I want and do what I want with the people I love, or occasionally leaving them behind because they won't come. But it's all about freedom for me. I
Yeah,
don't want to own everything, but I'd like to give my best shot at seeing everything.
fantastic. I can resonate with that or relate to that. Cool. Annabel, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been really insightful and incredibly helpful.
Thank you for having me.
And a lot of fun as well.